Hi there, folks. It is the week of February 9th. This lecture will be on Chapter 3, Using HTML and CSS3 with ASP.NET. This chapter includes a lot about HTML5 and CSS3, even though the book itself is not focused on HTML5 and CSS3. This chapter does give you enough that you can work with that will help you to create applications, web applications, rich internet applications that will look good and use proper HTML5 and CSS3. If you've had the 1400 class, then you should have some bearing, some understanding of HTML5 and CSS3. And there's also another class, I forget the code, I think it's 1420 or 1440, that's specifically for HTML5 topics with CSS3. So the applied objectives are given an external style sheet. Apply its styles to the forms of an application. Use the new style dialog box to create a new style, and use the modify style dialog box to modify one. And then you will also know various things, such as you should be able to describe terms as they relate to HTML documents, such as element, block element, inline element, start tag, content, end tag, self-closing tag, and attribute. Describe the use and benefits of HTML5 semantic elements. These are new in HTML5. They do not exist in previous versions, and they take the place of what div tags did a whole lot of prior to HTML5. So we will describe the proper use of the HTML div and span elements. Describe 3 ways to include CSS in a web page. You should have definitely covered this if you've taken 1400. And describe the use and benefits of external style sheets. Describe coding for different types of CSS selectors, or 3 types we will explore. The element type, class, and ID. So describe the components of a CSS rule set. So we'll talk about different rule sets and the selector, the property names, and the values that go with them. We will also describe the use of the CSS class attribute of a server control in our ASPX documents. And we will also describe the issue of cross-browser compatibility and describe 2 workarounds for using HTML5 semantic elements with old browsers. So the workarounds are actually very simple. You just include a JavaScript file that's provided to you by Google. You don't have to download it and install it or anything like that. You just point to a link off of one of Google's code bases, and then you just put the you put that JavaScript, and then you put a little bit of CSS, and then you're done. So the user interface for the application we will actually work on building today looks something like this. You'll notice this is a little different than the version that we had last time. We are not using tables actually to produce this application. We are going to do a more proper way to using tables to define the structure of the application. Is kind of an old way to do things, or format of the application in a lot of ways. We're going to use HTML and provide the content and structure in a more HTML5 way, and then put the formatting, do the formatting with CSS. So I believe we discussed the concept of separation of concerns before, but separation of concerns is when you take 2 or more different things or aspects, for example, of a website or software of any sort, and you basically separate up the different major components of it. And I don't mean just different controls or things like that, but the overall concern, for example, of the formatting of the website, which has to do with like styles, colors, font sizes, alignment, things like that. And the content and structure itself is something that CSS and HTML are good at. HTML contains the content and the structure of the web page, and then the CSS is used for the formatting. So here's an example when you first generate a new form. The HTML that's generated by a new form looks something like this. You'll notice there's div tags in there. When you redo it, you can remove the div tags, and then you can add this title here and then put this link. We will see how to do all this in a little bit, but we're just kind of breezing over the structure here and looking at different aspects. You'll notice that these are using, now notice this is not the head element or head tags, right? These are the header tags. Okay, so these are the head tags up here. The header tags and section tags are what are called semantic elements and are used in HTML5. You'll also notice that this image element right here has an ID attribute. ID attributes and class attributes, like we have down here. This is CSS class here, but ultimately when the code is generated, it generates a class attribute. IDs and classes are used with CSS extensively. So you've got CSS class, CSS class. CSS class are used to, not surprisingly, classify different controls and objects that you have on the form. So we'll see a little bit more about that later. And this is what an external style sheet looks like. So you'll notice this is not HTML. This is CSS. So if you're not familiar with this, you've got this part right here. This is called the selector. In this case, we have a type selector. So it's also called an element selector, which is body. Since that matches the name of an HTML element, it's a type or an element selector. Same thing with H1, which is a heading 1, and a label. So these match the actual elements or types, so we call them type selectors. And inside of this entire block of code here has the selector and then the block of code after it. The whole thing is called a rule set, a set of rules, basically. So this is the set of styling rules to format the body tag. So the body selector, open curly brace and a close curly brace at the end, and then you've got each of these individual rules. Each of these rules is made up of a property name, such as font family, or property name such as font size, property name width, and you'll notice there's a colon that separates the property name from the value or values that the property applies to. So you've got a semicolon at the end as well. It is optional to put the semicolon at the last element, but it is definitely a good idea. So just every time you have a rule, put the semicolon there and you don't have to worry about it. So those are type selectors. Now down here you'll notice there's a period in front of these. These are class selectors. So these wouldn't apply necessarily to every type of element in an HTML document. These just apply to elements that have, say, entry or validator or button as selectors, or as set as the class for those particular elements in the HTML document. We'll see how that looks in a little bit. You actually set the CSS class element or attribute in the window Visual Studio, so that when it generates it, it'll actually create a class attribute and set it to things like entry, validator, and button. So we've got type selectors, class selectors, and then finally we've got ID selectors. These are styles that are applied to individual items. So while a class can be applied to one or more items, the ID selectors, these styles should only be applied, can only be applied to one item because the ID has to be unique. So these are common HTML elements you should be at least somewhat familiar with. You've got H1 and H2, which are headings, paragraph, images, the form element, anchor tag, which has to do with links and things like that, input for input text box, and labels just for labeling, and then BR for a break, which basically causes a new line to occur. And notice that there are different types. There are block elements, and then there are inline elements as well. Block elements are essentially elements that when you create a block element, it will cause there to be a new line after it automatically. So it starts and ends on its own line, or lines depending. And then when you put another element, it'll start on another line. But inline will just continue with the whatever the preceding element is, and we'll put whatever content you have there. So it will not actually create a new line automatically to put the element on. So these are two examples. You've got the holiday or Halloween Superstore. That's a heading, and then you have a paragraph underneath. These are block elements with open and closing tags. There's an opening tag and a closing tag. And then you have two self-closing tags. You've got BR, and then image source, logo, GIF, and alt is numeric logo. Now, this is more of an HTML style, older HTML style. I believe they show you a better way to do it, maybe in a second, but I'll tell you what to do anyway. Put a forward slash between the R and the closing tag, and then the same thing here. That's the XML, or what we call XHTML style, for self-closing tags, and you should probably use that. HTML5 doesn't really care either way, but it's better to use the XHTML format. If you have certain attributes that have values, such as, or you do have certain attributes that have values, such as type is an attribute and it has the value checkbox, and name has the value mail list. Well, there's some attributes that don't take on a value. You don't put equals something after it. You just put the word. Okay, so the word checked here. Checked is a Boolean attribute. It's either there or it's not. If it's not there, then this would not be checked. If it is there, then this checkbox would actually have a check in it by default. So, something to keep in mind. If you want to write a comment in HTML, then you put a less than angle brace, and then an exclamation point, and then two hyphens or minus signs. Then you put whatever comment you want, and then you close the comment with two minus signs and a greater than symbol. If you want to code a character entity for a space, you have a non-breaking space and NBSP, and don't forget the semicolon. There are a lot of special characters you can code in HTML, and this just happens to be one of them. And they start with an ampersand and they end with a semicolon, and then whatever the special characters are in between, such as NBSP for a space, then that's what you have to write. Now, normally in HTML, I could hit the spacebar about 20 times, and it'll only really interpret one space between, say, words, for example. But if I want to actually show a bunch of spaces between two things, or for whatever reason, then I would use something like NBSP. The semantic elements. There are several semantic elements that are available in HTML5 now. These semantic elements include the header, section, article, nav, aside, figure, and footer. I will direct you to page 87 in the ASP.NET 4.5 web programming book with C# 2012. You can also find information about it very readily on the web, specifically W3 Schools and even the World Wide Web Consortium's website as well. But you've got header, which is basically the header for the page semantically. The section is a generic section of a document that doesn't indicate the type of content. It says nothing about the type of content. Article is a composition like an article in the paper. Nav is a section of the page that contains links to other pages. So it's basically the navigation bar or a navigation section of some sort. Aside is a section of a page like a sidebar that is related to the content that's near it. Figure is an image table or other component that's treated as a figure, just like you would in a book, like figure 1.1, figure 1.2. And then footer is the footer for the page. So they made this a lot more easy in HTML5 to you just style these, and then if the browser interprets them appropriately, then or you've taken due diligence in case it does not have the ability to understand these, then everything will work quite well. So there's an example of a page that uses the body tag, which is normal in HTML. Then you have the header tag, which has a heading in it. The section tag has a paragraph in it. You could put multiple paragraphs in it. And then a footer at the bottom with a paragraph in it. So each of these can be styled separately, which we will see in a little bit. So the page displayed in a web browser, if you just use that. The div and span tags, traditionally the div element has been used to divide an HTML document into divisions that are identified by ID attributes, as shown in this example right here. So I say div ID equals header, div ID equals contents, div ID equals footer, etc., etc. But now that we have semantic elements in HTML5, such as header, section, and footer, we don't and we shouldn't use div to structure the document. So instead, you should only use these when the HTML5 semantic elements aren't appropriate and no structure is implied. So, for example, you want to group a series of elements so you can apply CSS to them, and you can put them in a div element. A couple notes about div versus span. Div elements are block level, so that means that they're going to, or block elements, so that means they're going to automatically generate themselves on their own line, a new line, whereas a span is an inline element, so it will not cause itself to be on the next line or what have you. So that's really the biggest difference between div and span. Alright, so more about the spans. You'll notice that the spans are actually used by the .NET framework or by Visual Studio when it's creating things such as the required field validators and the range field validators that we talked about last week. So if you'll recall, we can create these elements using the toolbox in Visual Studio, which we'll see a little bit later when we do an example. But the required field validators are basically connected to a particular input type that they're trying to validate. The same thing with the range validator. They're associated with a particular input control of some sort of control on the form. So for required field validators, if you'll recall, that means if you neglect to put a value in them, it will cause an error. So then you tell it what is the error. Now you'll notice that this is the HTML generated span elements generated by the ASP.NET server controls from them. So this has two validators and a label control. You've got the label down here. So we notice that ASP.NET server controls, actually the labels are actually realized as spans. This is a regular old HTML label, and this is the one generated by ASP.NET. There are three ways to provide styles. This would be a good question for a test, either in 1400 or even in 2555. So you'll notice there are three ways to do it. You have an external style sheet, which we'll use extensively. That's when you have a style sheet that has a .css extension. It does not have any HTML in it. Then you have embedded styles. These are per document. You put them in the top, in the header, in the head section, not the header section. In the head section, you use style tags to close the style element, and then you have the CSS in between those tags, such as body and h1. Those are two element selectors, body and h1. And you can also use the style attribute of an element to provide inline styles. So this is used sometimes if you have to make a really specific adjustment to something inside the document. But notice that it goes in order here. the sequence in which the styles are applied is that the styles from an external style sheet are applied first, embedded styles are applied next, and then inline styles. So what that means is the precedence is inline styles, embedded styles, then external. So that means if you apply a style with external style sheet, let's say you create the general font for everything to be Times New Roman, and then later on you might have an embedded style that says, well, for this one page I actually want to make it all Helvetica or something else, or Consolas or Courier New. And then later with an inline style you say, no, I want Arial for just this one line. So this gets more specific to what you're applying to, but you'll notice it also overrides the style above it depending on the level. We're going to use external style sheets quite frequently in this course. So here's a head element that includes two external style sheets. You'll notice the title element here with the opening and closing title tags. You have the Halloween store, and then you have two links to different style sheets. Now you can have multiple style sheets. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. You can either type this in Visual Studio, link rel equals style sheet, and then href, give it the source of the style sheet, or we can use one of the other methods we'll learn in a little bit, which involve things like dragging them onto the design view or in the code view as well. Okay. So to generate a link element for an external style sheet, once you have an external style sheet created, you go to Format, Attach Style Sheet. We'll use that when we do our example. So just keep it in mind that you can generate a link element. Now what do we mean by link element? Well, this is what they're talking about, link elements. These are link elements right here. So keep that in mind. Link elements has their internal tags here. And HTML that can be selected by type, class, or ID. You've got a situation where these can be selected by type, such as the body or the section, even H1 or P. If you select something by class, then you're selecting it by the class attribute here, and then the ID attribute applies to a single entity, whereas you'll notice that class allows for multiple possibilities. These are three rule sets with type selectors. You've got the body, section, and paragraph. Those are the selectors. Body has a property for font family, sets it to Arial. Now if Arial is not available, it'll use Helvetica, and if Arial and Helvetica are not available on the system that's trying to load this and the browser can't find either of them, it'll use any useful sans serif font. Okay, which is that's actually a category. It's not a specific font. It means without serif. So basically, without like the little curly connectors and things like that, and tails on the different letters. That's a sans serif. Serif are the ones that are a little bit more ornate. Width is 400 pixels, and then the margin, we're saying it's 1 EM or M unit, and then auto. This is for the top and the bottom, and then the left and the right are auto. If you're wondering what an EM is, you're like, why don't we use pixels? Well, sometimes it's more useful to make the margins the size of whatever the M is, the letter M is, since it's a very predictable size at largest within a particular alphabet. So we say it's the width of 1 M. That's what it means. So depending on the font, that will actually could be different. The section has a border and padding, 2-pixel border that's solid and black rather than dashed or some other type, and then the paragraph has margins. So this has different margins around it depending on what side you're on. Then we have two rule sets with class selectors. So this is a rule set right here. It only has one property changed here, but dot blue sets the color to blue. Dot right sets the text of the line to right. So one of them affects the alignment, the other affects the color. So we also have an ID selector here. So notice the pound sign on the front. Classes have a period in front. If you're used to a programming language, you know that most of the programming languages you're probably dealt with, like Java, when you select a member of a particular object or class, you use the dot operator. So you can think of that as a mnemonic device. If you already are familiar with that, you can think of, well, that's class, and then the pound sign, just think of that as the ID. And this is what it looks like if you apply the actual CSS to our original document from earlier. Now, some of the styles in the external style sheet, we won't look at these just yet, but they're available in the slides, just so you know if you're doing the exercise or following along with me. Just go back to, say, slide 33 if I say to look at the styles for the future value application. So you'll notice that on the next page they finished off, they've got several type or element selectors right here. You've got body, H1, and label. And then you've got the styles for the class right here. There's only one class here. That's entry. And then you notice there are styles for the IDs for the server controls, such as DDL monthly investment and label future value. These are current browsers, and as of the writing of this book, they're ranking, or rather they're rating by the HTML5 test. You can actually test to see the ratings for the different browsers. But Google Chrome 27 is the most compatible with HTML5. It has a 463, whereas a perfect score would be 500. Notice that Internet Explorer, which is typically the case, is not very good at supporting, and neither really is Apple Safari. The newer versions of these should get better as time goes on, as any of these will. So eventually there will be probably near full support of HTML5. However, there are situations where you're going to have a lot of users that have older browsers. So if you want to affect the vast majority of users, you have to use workarounds to ensure that the stuff that's used in HTML5, their browser can still interpret. So here's the workaround for using the HTML5 semantic elements. This is one of the biggest issues with browsers that can't interpret HTML5 is the semantic elements. Now, if you're thinking, well, what's a semantic element? If you'll recall, when we were talking earlier, we had the header and the section and article and things like that, footer. Those are the semantic elements. So in order to get them to work on older browsers, you include what's called a JavaScript shiv. This is basically like you're duct taping this so that if their browser does not understand HTML5, this code will actually take care of it. So notice it's html5shiv.googlecode.com/svns for the subversion source code /trunk/html5.js. You just basically copy paste that, and then you can copy and paste this rule set to ensure that the CSS elements are interpreted at block level. Otherwise, they may be interpreted as inline. Okay, so you want to make sure these are all interpreted, all these semantic elements are interpreted as block level. So that's the override for that. You need both of these to make it work properly in older browsers. They're showing you about IntelliSense. We already kind of looked at IntelliSense. IntelliSense will start filling in things for you as you type, so not much interest there. Okay, Visual Studio. Some individuals that may be wanting to use your site may have some sorts of disabilities. These disabilities could include things such as visual disability. They could be blind, completely blind, or just have very serious vision problems. Hearing. You could also have motor skills, so they might not be able to use a mouse very well, so you might want to include it. Keyboard shortcuts to access different things, and cognitive. Some have cognitive impairment as well. So, although this is outside the scope of the book as far as the full range of the Y aria values, don't say Y aria, that sounds gross, so be careful with that. But the Y aria values and the aria attributes that are available, these have to do with the accessible rich internet applications and consortiums within the World Wide Web Consortium, or I guess I would say they're committees or subcommittees within the consortium that deal specifically with accessibility issues. And accessibility is a major topic for web designers, especially. You want to be able to make your website accessible to as many users as possible, and this especially includes disabled users. Okay, so they show you an external style sheet in Visual Studio. We'll see all that when we do some examples. If you want to create an external style sheet, then you would right-click the project in Internet Explorer, go to Add Style Sheet, and then type the name for the new style sheet and click OK. Then you can edit the style sheet however you want. You can enter and edit styles. You can open the style sheet in the code editor and enter the styles in the style sheet directly. Modify the ASPX code so it provides the IDs and classes. And then after you enter a rule or series of rules, you switch to Design View and see whether they're working. Or you can test them in browsers. Another really handy thing, if you've got code highlighted inside of your design environment, or well, the code editor specifically, either HTML or CSS or C# in the code behind file, if you highlight code that you want to comment out and you press Control K, Control C, so you hold down the Control key and then you tap the K, that puts you in a mode, and then you tap the C, that comments out the selected rules or code that you have highlighted, and then Control K, Control U uncomments them. So Control K puts you in the mode for commenting. You have to remember that, and then Control C comments, Control U uncomments. Or you can just click the comment or uncomment button on the style sheet toolbar, or you could type them yourself. There are different types of windows that you can access inside of Visual Studio that can help you look at the CSS and decide what to do with it and edit it and see what's going on in the actual application of it. One is if you go to View Other Windows Document Outline, that'll show the CSS outline window. This is the new style dialog box. We can create new styles from the Format menu, Format New Style. This dialog box we will be using in our example. So you basically can change the styles and create the styles from this box. It's a nice clean way to do it. It'll show you anything you've changed up here kind of in a bold. So this means for this style body, for the body style selector, they put font, they didn't do anything for block, background, border, and box. All have something that's been changed in them. So we will use this a few times when we're working on the future value application. Another thing to note though about the new style dialog box specifically is that the selector is up here. If you wanted it to be a type selector, element selector, you just type the name of that element, or you can use the drop down, and this will show things like anchor tag and body and header and all this other, or heading and header and all this other stuff. And then you have to switch this define in. You have to change this to external or existing style sheet, and then tell it which style sheet you're talking about. So you might have to use browse for that. So again, selector. You can put the type level or element level. You can also put class level or ID level. So to make it class level, I would just type a period in front of it. So I would put period blue, or for ID level I'd put £, some specific element, or £, my element, or whatever. So you can do all three of them in here. It creates them and adds them to the style sheet. You can obviously type it manually as well. To modify styles in the editor for a style sheet, you just right-click the style and then select Build Style, or click on the Build Style button in the style sheet toolbar. Alright. You'll notice if you hover over these in the Apply Styles dialog over here, or window, that it'll show you what the CSS is immediately. To display the Apply Styles window, you just go to a View, Apply Styles. So that'll be useful when we actually start applying some styles. Okay. You've also got the CSS properties window under View CSS Properties. That shows you some extra information, and it's also you've got Manage Styles window. So you've got CSS Properties, Manage Style window, and also Apply Styles, all under this same group here. It kind of brings up many tabs underneath. So that's pretty much what we want. We will use, or we will do, that's an extra right here, but we're going to do the example at the end of the chapter. So after we take a brief break, we're going to do exercise 3.1 on page 114 and 115. If you don't have this book and you're just following along, just pay attention to what we do next, and you should be okay. I have uploaded the code that you will need for this. It is under week 3, HTML5 and CSS with ASP.NET. And it's called EX03 future value. That is a zip file that all you have to do is download it and unzip it first, and then we're going to load it and then do a couple minor switches to it. So first we're going to load it. File, open, website, and then you go looking for it wherever you downloaded it and unzipped it to. I've got it here. It's called EX03 future value. That's the one. It basically goes from what we were starting with last week, but it doesn't have the tables in it. It removed the tables. So I'm going to hit OK on that, or open on that, and you'll notice something here. This is using the ASP.NET development server because, remember, our hint is that it has a C and colon and then the path name. So we want to switch to use IIS. So you're going to right click and go to Use IIS Express. Tell it yes and then tell it OK. You'll notice now it just says the name of the project. It no longer has the path name. So that's good. Well, even though the formatting is jacked up on this, I'm going to open this for a second and we'll look at the design. The design's a little bit goofy. It's not really good yet because we haven't applied any styles to it, but just make sure it loads in Internet Explorer. I'm not sure why that's doing that. Let me check. Okay, so we experienced a little bit of an error, and I want to show you where the error came from. If you go to right-click the project and go to Property Pages, it was set to .NET 4. So if you've got that set, you're going to have some errors when you try to build it. It'll say unobtrusive validation mode does not exist, and it might say like namespace name does not exist. And it says, are you missing an assembly reference? So basically I figured it had something to do with the .NET Framework version. So if you load this and you get an error like that, then you just right click the project, go to the property pages, and then you want to change the target framework to 4.5. Okay, hit apply, hit yes, and then if some other thing comes up, just ignore it, build it, and then you can run it in Internet Explorer or whatever you want. So, okay, there we go. So there you go. So I can hit calculate, and it will actually work. You'll notice it is actually working and functioning, but the problem we are going to have is that this is not formatted really well. So we have to look at how we can format it without using a table. We're going to try to format it the CSS HTML5 way. So before we do that, I'm going to take a brief break, and I suggest maybe you do the same. It's been about 40 minutes almost. So I'm going to pause this and come back, and then we will finish it up. Okay, so we already converted this to IIS Express by right-clicking and going to use IIS instead of Visual Studio Development Server. So I already took care of that. The form already contains the labels and control that we'll need for this application, but it does not have the HTML table for the layout that we used before. And it also doesn't contain any styling information either. So since the default layout is ASP.NET uses the default layout as flow layout, you'll notice that all the labels and controls flow to the right of the elements that precede them. And if we run the application, we see that it still looks kind of goofy, right? So it's goofy, it works, we get information, but it's still goofy. This is not how we'd want it to be displayed. So we're going to start changing some things. So we're going to begin styling the form. So I'm going to go into the source here. After the drop-down list and each text box and the label server control, I'm going to put a BR element. So first I'm going to go to the drop-down list. There's my drop-down list. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to type BR/ and then a closing angle brace. So that's after the drop-down list. We've got that. Then we're going to put it after each text box. So we don't want it after this label. I do want it after this text box here, BR, and then another one after this text box, BR, and after the ASP server control label. So there's the ASP server control label here. I'm going to put one there as well. So once I've got that, we can view the form to see that each label starts on a new line as flowed and flows. So I can go to Design View, and it'll show me that everything does start on its own line. So far so good. I'm going to set the CSS class attribute of the drop-down list. We'll do it in design just to show you. I'm going to click there, and I'm going to go to the CSS class attribute. Now, since we haven't created the actual external style sheet yet, this isn't going to do anything, but I'm going to type entry. That's going to be the name of the class. So I hit that, and that's the entry. So now we're actually going to create the style sheet. So on page 103 in your book, there is an example and some information about how to create an external style sheet. So it's very simple. You just go over to the Solution Explorer, and on the project, which is EX03 future value, you right-click that, and then you go to Add, and then you select Style Sheet from the bottom. So when you do that, it'll bring up a little dialog box and ask you what do you want to name the style sheet. And in this case, we're just going to name it styles.css. So styles.css. Then you hit OK. It creates the style sheet and gives you an empty body rule set. So it says to add a style sheet and then to add the rule set for the body that's shown in figure 3-3. That's on page 83 in the book. So if you go to page 83, if you don't have it, it's not a big deal. You're going to be able to use it just straight from here. But in the body, you've got the font family property, Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. Then the next line, you've got font size. We're going to put that at 85%. The width at 550 pixels. Margin 0 and auto. So that puts the top and bottom at 0, and then the left and right at automatic. The padding 10 pixels all the way around. Background color is white. And then we're going to do border. So the border around this is 2 pixels wide, solid, and then 0000FF. If you're familiar with hexadecimal, the first 2 zeros have to do with the red value. You can go up to FF, that would be pure red, and then you've got green in the center, and then you've got blue. So since this is fully blue, no red and no green, this color is just blue. You could type the word blue too and it would actually work. So I'm going to save that and then read the next instruction. Okay, so alright, so we got that. Got step 8. and then it says to use figure 3.7 as a guide to drop or drag the style sheet from Solution Explorer and drop it into the head section of the HTML for the form. Okay, well, on page 91 they show you how to do so. This is not really that difficult. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close the web config here. I'm going to go to the default ASPX and look at the source, and you'll notice inside the head it looks like it's already linked. If it does not do that for you, then you're going to click this and you're going to drag it over here, and it's not really that difficult. You just let go and it will cause it to go there automatically. So it looks like it's done it for us. If it did it and you didn't want it to, you just delete the link element and it's not a big deal. Then we want to, you can go to page 105 and it shows you how to use the new style dialog box. So we're going to create a new style. Instead of typing it in, we're going to use the new style dialog box and to add the H1 rule set in figure 3.3. So if you look at page 83, it shows figure 3.3. This is where we'll be getting a lot of our information, so keep that in mind. They want us to style the H1 tag, but not to enter it manually, which we could do. I mean, we could enter the whole thing manually if we want to. But just to get used to some of Visual Studio's environment here, I'm going to do it the way they say. So you can go to the format, make sure you're on the default ASPX. I'm going to save it just to make sure we're up to date here. Go to format, new style, and then the new style dialog box will pop up. You can delete this, make sure you delete the period as well, and change the selector to H1. Now if you put defining current page, it's going to put an embedded style sheet, which is not what we want. We want to go with the existing style sheet. Then you have to tell it which one. So I could use the drop down or the browse. I'm going to use the drop down and select style.css. So what do I want to do? I want to change it to the stuff that I see on page 83 in figure 3.3. So we know that the font size and the color of the font are set there. The font size should be 140% is what they want. So you type 140, change this drop down from pixel to percentage. Then they ask you to change the color to 0000FF. So I'm going to type 0000FF. So that's blue. Alright, then they say set the padding and margin bottom. Well, I don't see padding and margin bottom on font, so I could look around, but I'll just tell you that the padding and margin are all in box. Okay, that has to do with the individual cells and formatting of the tables, and they're not really tables, but the boxes around different items. So you've got the information inside, you've got a border. The padding is the distance between the information and the border from the inside. The margin is outside the border. It separates it from other elements. So for H1, the padding, we just set 0 to all elements. Since it says 0, you'll notice there's a checkbox that says same for all. We just want 0 pixels. That's fine. It doesn't really matter what the unit is here. The other one is margin bottom is 0.5 EM. So we only want the bottom to be affected. So I'm going to uncheck this, change this to 0.5, and then since we want M's instead of PX for pixel, you use the drop down and select EM. Then you want to hit apply. Okay. Apparently it's angry at us for some reason. Give me just a second and I will figure out what's going on. It's been quite a live television show. Okay, I think the problem was that I didn't put the pound symbol in front of the color. So that might have been why it was very upset at me. So I think we're good now. So we do have the font size, the color, the padding, and the margin bottom. Now don't mind if this is 0px instead of just 0 like it has in the book. That's not a big deal because 0 is 0. 0 apples, 0 oranges, 0 cows, 0 horses. There's nothing there, so it doesn't matter. That is the thing you want to do to the H1 rule. note the changes in design view. So we're going to look at default ASPX and look at design view. Some things are starting to come together here. You'll notice things are starting to look a little bit better, a little bit different. And oh, did we change the color? We did. And it didn't change it here. Well, let's try this. I want to make sure that this is getting the correct style sheet, so I'm going to drag him over there. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it must be thinking I'm in a different folder. So you can click and drag it over here, make sure it's the correct one, and now it should actually apply. Okay, there we go. That's much better. Now the thing's centered, you've got a border around it, and you've got the 401k future value calculator here. So I think it was where I added the style sheet. It was a little bit confused at me. So it doesn't really matter as long as you click and drag it and take it into the file that you're applying it to. So this is the external style sheet, the styles.css, and here's the result of our hard work. I'm going to go back to the source here for a second. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the same technique to add a style for the label element that's shown in figure 3.3. You'll find the width property in the position category, and you'll find the float property in the layout category. So I'm going to go to Format, New Style, and we're going to add the label property here. Make sure that you delete the period again. Type label. This is a type level or element level selector that you're creating. You define it in the external style sheet. Again, styles.css. It's that one right there. And we're going to change this, the float, which is under layout, to left. And you're going to change the width, which is under position, right here, to 10 ems. So I'm going to change this to an em, hit apply, hit OK, and we're good. So now we go to design. Things are starting to look even better, right? Starting to really come together. So that's the label. The next thing we're going to do, because I'm following along in the book just like you would be, so I want to show you different things. So the next thing we do, as I check this off, using whichever technique you prefer, it says to add the rule sets for the entry class selector that's shown in figure 3.3. Then note the changes in design view. So entry, we've got the entry on page 83 as well. So that's a class level or a class selector. So I'm going to go to new style. I'm going to keep the period. So point entry. Oops, should only have one entry. And then they want under the box options, you have margin left and bottom should be 1 and 0.5 respectively. So for the margin, I'm going to set the left to 1. I'm going to set the bottom to 0.5, and then I want to change the units to ems. Okay, so 0.5 and 1. And then I want to set the width under position to 10 ems. So I'm going to type 10, and then change this to em for m. Hit apply, hit OK. If I go to design view, I notice there's starting to get some stuff spaced out here. Things are starting to come together. The next thing that we're going to do is create and test the rest of the styles. We're going to add the rule set for the button class in figure 3.3, but you'll notice that even if you check in design view that you won't see anything happening because the CSS class attributes have not been changed for the buttons. So let's create the rule first, and then we'll apply it to the buttons. So I'm going to go to Format, New Style, and I'm going to create the button class rule here. Under box, I'm going to set the margin top, just the top, to 1 EM. And then position, I'm going to change it to 10 EMs. Okay, that's all you need for button. Click apply, click OK. And if you go to, I'm going to save the style sheet. You'll notice it'll generate the style for that. I can close that actually. So you've got default.aspx. If I go to design, you'll notice it didn't really do anything to the buttons. That's because they don't have any CSS set to them. So I'm going to click just this button, btn calculate, and you'll notice that there is a CSS class property that this has associated with it. The attribute essentially is what it comes down to. CSS class attribute. I click that, and I want this to take on the button, and the same thing for clear. I want to take that to take on button, and let's make sure it's not doing anything goofy here. Yeah. Okay, and apparently we haven't set these to label CSS class. No, those are just regular labels. And we'll figure out what's going on. Alright, give me just a second. I will see what's going on. And this is why we have live television here. You will notice that for the drop down and the text boxes, it says that the text boxes should themselves, okay, one second, be set to have the entry CSS class. So here's one, here's another. Yeah, some of these are going to misbehave a little bit. So the CSS class should be set to entry for that, and also for this one. So let's see if we can get this to look a little bit nicer. Okay, there we go. That's much better, isn't it? Okay, so I had neglected to do that. I even set it in the step and just neglected to actually follow through with it. So this looks a lot nicer. Okay, see, live television, folks. Sort of. So we made the button class, and we applied the button style, or I'm sorry, we made the button rule set and then applied that style to the buttons. And it says add the 3 rule sets for the ID selectors. After each one, check the changes in design view. Okay, so we're going to go to page 83, back to 83, and we could type them all in. Or we can add them using the format new style. So I'm going to do format new style for now. Format new style. You've got 3 ID selectors. Now ID selectors start with the pound sign, DDL monthly investment, and we know that the position, the width should be 10.5 EMs. Hit apply and OK. That's one. And if we look here, you'll notice there's stuff that starts changing here, right? So that one was the drop-down list, so it looks a little bit different. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to new style again. Then we're going to do the pound sign LBL future value, and then they want you to put in the font option, they want you to set the font weight to bold. So I'm just going to select that, hit apply. And then the margin left is under box. Uncheck this because they only want it on the left. And they just want 1 M for that. Okay, so we hit OK on that one. And then finally we create another style, new style. You're going to call this one pound sign BTN clear, so the clear button. The only thing they want here is they don't want a special font or anything like that. They just want the margin left to be 1 EM. So that's under box. We uncheck the same for all, take the left and make it 1, change it to M. Hit OK, and you'll notice everything looks much more organized. It's starting to look really clean. We didn't have to use a table, none of that. So everything's starting to look pretty darn nice. Okay, so we add the 3 rules for the ID selectors. We're going to test the form in a couple browsers here. If I open it up in Internet Explorer, I can hit calculate, but you'll notice I can make the annual interest rate like 150%, and it's not preventing me from doing that. I think we would all love to have $618 million by the time we retire, after only 10 years of saving, but it's probably not likely. So there are limits on this that are not being calculated. So I can even leave it empty and hit calculate, and it's going to give me an error. It's going to throw an exception. So we definitely don't want that. Okay. So we need validators. So we're going to add the validation controls and their CSS. So we have required field validators, and their information are on page 81. So it shows us which validators are needed. The first thing is I need a validator for the first text box. I should have a required field and a range validator. So this right here, I'm going to open up our little toolbox. So I'm going to go to View Toolbox right here. Okay, they moved it over there for whatever reason. Don't like it. Okay. Put that up there. I'm going to actually move the Solution Explorer up here as well, and keep the toolbox up there also. Oh, this is annoying. Okay, Solution Explorer, and okay, 1 second. I want to put that with the stuff. Okay, it seems to be irritating. Okay, for some reason. Oh well. Okay, so I'll just leave the toolbox down here. It's not a big deal. There we go. No, that didn't work at all. Okay, and then let me take the whole thing and put it there. That should be good for now. Okay, so I got the toolbox now, and in the toolbox in Design View, drag an item onto the. Okay, this is misbehaving a little bit. I think we're in debug mode is what the problem is. Okay, stop debugging. Now everything looks pretty again. All right, that's what was going on. I knew it looked kind of funky. Okay, so under validation, if I close the standard options here, we've got validation, and the 2 that we're going to need are the required field validator and the range validator. So first I'm going to drag a required field validator on here after the first text box, and I'm also going to drag a range validator after that. Okay, same thing. I need a required field validator for the next text box and a range validator for that text box as well. So now we have to change some of the values around here and make sure that they're applied properly. So the first one is the required field validator. It should be associated with the TXT interest rate, because that's the annual interest rate that it's next to. So the way to do that is we're going to set the control to validate as TXT interest rate. So if I go in here, I've got control to validate. There's a drop down, and I put TXT interest rate. So another thing that I want to make sure that we get is you want to set the error message. So right here, the error message here, I'm going to delete all this junk out of there. For the error message for that one, you have to put interest rate is required. Then hit enter. All right. And then make sure that the display is set to dynamic. All right, so that will ensure that it is displayed properly in the context of the CSS and the HTML. Okay, so make sure I got everything. Run at server CSS. The CSS should be set to validator. We haven't created that yet, but I'm going to put validator. Okay, and we will define that a little bit later. So the next one's the range validator. For the range validator, we also want to set the CSS in just a second. We want to set the CSS to validator, and I want to set the control to validate to interest. Here it is, to interest rate, txt interest rate. Display should be set to dynamic. And then you have to actually put an error message. This one should just say interest rate must range from 1 to 20. Now, unlike the required field validator, which basically just it automatically tests did they put something in that did they put anything in that text field. The problem with this, with the range, is that we have to actually specify what values it is ranged from. Now, that is not done by the error message. The error message is just what's printed to the user if they don't have the minimum and maximum value set. So we need to set minimum and maximum. The maximum value is 20, and the minimum value is 1. All right. So we've got that, 1 and 20. So that's good for that. Oh, also type. We should set the type to double, because that is, it's a double type. It can take real numbers, and that's what we want it to be able to take. Okay, so see if we're forgetting anything. Nope, that's good. Okay, now for the next one, the required field validator, again the CSS style should be set to, you just type validator, which does not exist yet. We will create it. And we want to put the control to validate. This one will actually validate the txt years. Okay, so the display should be set to dynamic from static. And we should have an appropriate error message. Okay, so for this one, we're going to say number of years is required. Okay, and let's make sure we got everything else. Yes. Now the range validator for the number of years, we have to tell it that it's going to validate that control. So we have to set control to validate to txt years. CSS class, we're going to type validator. Good. And then we have to set the display to dynamic from static. And then we put an error message. If we scroll down here, we take the error message attribute here, and we type years must range from 1 to 45. Okay, and then since this is a range validator, we actually have to give it a range. So the minimum or the maximum is 45, and the minimum is 1. To be sure that it treats the values appropriately, and this is only going to accept integers, which are just the whole numbers, you have to use the drop down next to type, select integer, and then save it. So let me see here if that's what we needed. That should be it. Let's build it, and I'm going to run it in Internet Explorer and see if this works. So everything looks pretty so far. Let's put 0 years. It'll say year range must be from 1 to 45. Okay, well that works. That seems to work. What if I put nothing in there? Okay, well that seems to work. And what about this? Annual percentage rate, interest rate, we're going to put calculate, and it gives you a range. If I do too high, it'll say the same thing. If I leave nothing there, it'll put interest rate required. So everything's good so far. However, we also want to add the required CSS attributes and then apply the styles. So the validator style has not been added yet. So we need to put the validator style that's on page 83. All right, that's the one we skipped earlier. We did it on purpose though. So we're gonna go to go to here, go to format, go to new style. It's going to be .validator, and then we're going to change the font to font size 95%. Change this to percentage, and then the color should be set to red because we want them to know they made an error. And then under box, we're going to set the margin left, just the left, to 1 EM, 1M. Hit apply, hit OK, and so that's pretty good. And I want to just make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, yep, okay. So let's run this, should be good. Okay, I hit calculate, it gives me a value. Now let's say I forgot to put something in here, it'll give me an interest rate as required. If I put a number that's way too large or way too small, it'll tell me what the interest rate must be. We'll make it 20, now it should be good. That's a good interest rate. And then we'll say number of years, we'll say 57, and it'll say no, you can't do that, it has to be between 1 and 45. Well, what if I leave it out? Well, number of years is required. So let's say for 5 years at 20%, not bad. Okay, so we've got all the information we need for this. So I think that's everything. So we got the validator class, apply styles. Yeah, so we've added all the styles that we needed. The apply styles, one thing I guess I should note about that. If I go to view apply styles, view, and then we go over here and go to apply styles, this gives me all these different styles that I can apply. Now I can select, let's say this did not have the CSS set to it. Let's say the CSS class was not set for this or this one. Okay, so we'll delete the CSS class for that. You could do it that way, but there's another way with the apply styles by going to the view apply styles option right here. It will show the apply styles down here, and I can just select, say for example, this required field, and then I just click validator, and it will automatically apply that style. Same thing here. We just click that and it'll apply that style. So that's just another way to apply them. Some people find this very, very useful. So you got apply styles or property. You can go under each of these and set the CSS class automatically. But the apply styles will also show things like the upper level styles, the class level styles, ID level styles, and also the type / element styles as well. So I won't do the experiment with some of Visual Studio's features that are steps 21 through 24. I'll leave that as an exercise for you. I'm not going to upload this finished product because I want you to go through it. I just have the unfinished version up there. So I'm going to close the solution. You can save it. That's good. Click no. And I hope you had a good time today. I think we actually got quite a bit done. Next week we will go over, I think, multi-form, or more multi-form stuff. Yeah, multi-page is what I meant. Developing multi-page web applications and doing some testing and debugging. Also next week, your first programming assignment, which is due March 13th, will be uploaded. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or communicate on our discussion board. There's a discussion board up there. So have a great day. Bye.